Ooh, Sparks analysis, and today we got some news. We got some big news. I did a lot more work. Did that last stream. A lot of other considerations as well. So I'm going to put that down. I'm going to plug you over yonder, and you're gonna go right here. So there's a lot of considerations when we're looking at the data, and I think I finally was able to include everything. And the reason why I'm showing you this point right here is because this is one big sticking point and stipulation that we got to consider when we're looking at this data, is that the average period of unemployment, as stated since August 2025, seasonally adjusted, was 24.5 weeks. That's on average. So people that are unemployed typically aren't even unemployed for a whole entire month. Sometimes they are, but on average it's 24.5 weeks, while the median was about 9.8 weeks. So actually, oh yeah, the numbers. Friggin', so for 24.5 weeks, it's not even a half year. In fact, that's 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 20. Well, it is about a half a year. Actually, that's pretty bad. That is pretty bad, but when we look at these numbers as well, actually, that does make a lot of sense alongside with the budget. But it doesn't really excuse a lot of the sticking points and talking points that politicians are making in order to refuse paying out welfare to 42 million people that really do need it. Because as we look at the numbers don't lie. As when we adjust for eligibility as well as age, as well as weighing that against those participating on SNAP, and if they're able-bodied, if they're not disabled. If you're disabled, then, I mean, morally, if you need the help for food stamps, and it's hard for you to get a job because of your disability, I mean, quite frankly, yeah, that you should just get food stamps. And regardless, when we look at the data adjusted, 87.5% of SNAP recipients are actually employed. Okay? When we shift through everything, when we pull out the numbers and reverse engineer the data that's coming, since August, mind you, so we're a few months behind. This could actually even be maybe less at this point with the amount of more layoffs that are coming, and the fact that people are, on average, laid off for about 6 months, but maybe only, 9 weeks, so about 2.5 months. That was my case. I would only didn't have a job for a few months, and then I was able to get 2 jobs. So, but quite frankly, when we look at if it's young men that are actually lazy, because again, we're looking at numbers from ages 20 and up, so including the elderly, including those that are 55 and up, as we laid out here. And you can also check out yesterday's video where we go over those numbers a little bit more depth, including separation by gender as well as separation by able-bodied or with disability, and all those considerations. Without adjusting for eligibility, we have about 17.6% of SNAP recipients that are unemployed, like kind of likely. And then about 82.4% of SNAP recipients weighed against that. But considering eligibility, which takes out, 16 to 19, because, living with their parents, they're getting claimed under their parents, they're most likely not eligible for food stamps, especially if their parents themselves are on food stamps, because it's going to be by same household. They're going to know. They're going to deny you. So it's not fair to say that young adults from age 16 to 19, unless they are out of foster care at the age of 18 and are homeless, you can consider there would be a small portion of 40,000, 41,000 people, right? But most likely they are not on SNAP. They could be unemployed. This is why we're looking at unemployed versus SNAP. We're trying to see what the real percentage of unemployed people are actually on SNAP and are taking up welfare, and really sticking it to a lot of these arguments that, hey, most of the people that are on SNAP are actually working individuals. Almost 90%. 9/10 of the people that receive SNAP work. So that already right there is a huge sticking point when you're trying to punish 42 million people, or 12.5% of the population, or about 1/8 of the population, right? Because of 10% supposedly of them, and this is not young men, this is people age 20 and up. This is including elderly, people that are unemployed that need SNAP, that might be within that window of 26 weeks, or about 6 months. So that's a huge consideration. And then when we look at actually adjusting out for very young adults and looking at these other percentages, percent out of total population, like I said, when we compare the total amount of SNAP recipients to the total population, that's about 1/8 of the population itself that rely on SNAP. And that's 1/8 of the grocery economy when you really look at it as well. Because the amount of people that use SNAP, they go to grocery stores, they don't go to restaurants. This is the same points that I was listing off yesterday. And this is how damaging refusing emergency funds is, perpetuating a government shutdown, all because you want to say that immigrants rely on health insurance when that is not true. That is not true. They do not have social security numbers if they are illegal immigrants, and if they are legal, actual, like, in the process, and they have temporary status, which was allowed by law, which is being stepped and trampled all over and disregarded, because, as we've seen, it's bad. It's very bad with how Border and Customs, DHS, is treating human beings that would actually qualify because they are going through their cases and such. So that's a whole other video and topic, but regardless, that's still a huge portion of the population, 1/8. That is effective, and just, it's bad. Imagine if a grocery store lost 1/8 of their profits. That's huge. And just like when we look at, I mean, even more so, the amount of SNAP recipients, it's 9 out of 10. That is huge, that are employed. So most of the people that are within this 1/8 are working. Okay? And then when we look at young adults and we adjust out very young adults age 16 to 19, so just strictly young adults age 20 to 24, compared to the national, it's 0.4% of the population. 0.4. And this isn't even adjusted out for eligibility yet. Okay? 0.4% of able-bodied. This is adjusted out for disability. And when we look at strictly young men, because this is young adults, this isn't even young men. Young men is 0.21. 1/5 of 1% of the entire population. Strictly young men that are able-bodied, unemployed, young adults compared to the total population, but they're possibly not eligible for SNAP if they're living with their parents, if they're being claimed on their taxes. In fact, we look at those numbers. We were able to figure that out as well. Because apparently, it's about 50%. I was generous in only doing 50% because when we look at the age range from 20 to 24, nope, that was households, single person, 3, yada yada. Percentage of adults, yep. So from 18 to 24, 58% of men. So it's closer to 60%, but I was generous. And I also excluded about 18 to 19% of young adults from age 25 to 34, because from that age, you're not being claimed as head of household. In fact, you might be eligible for SNAP benefits even if you are living with your parents. Depending on the situation, you can still have an agreement to rent with your parents. I mean, especially at this age, that would be most common of a practice. Or if you're unemployed, if you don't have an income, what the hell are you going to do? Right? If you're stuck with the limbo, as we also discussed previously, that when we look at the amount of available jobs compared to the amount of people that are unemployed, and that's if these are even adjusted for ghost jobs, so this number might be inflated, 5,308,000 jobs available. We have not seasonally adjusted, so not adjusted for seasonal jobs, 7.7 million people unemployed. Adjusted for seasonal, 7.4 million people unemployed. There's not enough jobs for even all these people to begin with, and that's even if they're qualified. And not even most of them are on SNAP to begin with. Well, maybe most of them are, but when we look at young adults, factor out, a hefty chunk because it's about 1 million people that we're factoring out of 7 million. That's 1/7 that we're taking out that are not going to be eligible for SNAP. And then another half of 1.3 million, because we're looking at able body right here. Disability, I mean, if you're living with your parents, then your parents could maybe have Social Security or some sort of arrangement for you, but that's still only like 1.6% of the number that is going to be half of this, because if they're being claimed on the taxes, especially if they're under their parents' health insurance, they're not going to be eligible for SNAP. And especially if their parents are already on SNAP. If their parents are already on SNAP and they have welfare and they claim you, you're not getting SNAP as well. That is not how it works. So then you can look at the total young adults, and that's already 1.5 million taken out of that 7.4 million. So this is why these numbers end up being so small, and why the arguments really fall apart when you look at the numbers. So after total unemployed adjusted for eligibility without disability from age 20 to 55, so this is also taking out the elderly, we have 4,169,197, which split by gender, by percentage, we have 2,197,167 young men, quote unquote young men, because I mean, this is also including 35 to 55, which I mean may be considered young by older people, but realistically is not that young. So strictly young adults aged 24, well 20 to 24, unemployed, living on their own, most likely on SNAP. So this is adjusted out of that 50% because that was from the young adults. So that's a 668 number right here. We're looking at about 352,250 young men that might actually be on SNAP, that are living on their own, that are unemployed. Okay? Compared to the 42 million. And then that's when we start looking at these numbers right here. Young men 20 to 24. 0.84% of SNAP recipients. 0.84% of that. Not even a percent of the SNAP recipients. And just forget about even looking against the total population, because that's 0.1%. That's just 0.1% of the entire population at that point. That are young men aged 20 to 24 that may quote unquote be lazy or may just be unemployed for 6 months. Okay? And therefore they're probably getting the maximum 298 for their unemployment benefits, and then 298, I mean, you can calculate how much that would cost, but that would still be, I don't know, actually would not be that much. Let me see. So where was I? Yep, 352,000. So 352, and this is for 6 months. 250. We'll find the monthly times. So the 298. That's the monthly adjusted. That's benefits. So this is going to be monthly cost. It's going to be 104 million. So it's a very small percentage of, if we compare to last year's expenditure of SNAP, because this is 104,970,000, and then we can multiply this times, 6 months. Because that is, well, the average, but the median is even 4 weeks, so it's even smaller than that if you account for that sort of window. But that's 629,820,000. $23,000 reduce. If that is going to be the typical period relative to people of that age group, the cost. And then we have last year's expenditure being 100.3 billion. So if we compare it to that, I mean, you can get a percentage, right? Divide by 100 billion, 300 million. And that's 0.6%. 0.0063 or 0.63% of total budget expenditure for that age group. For young unemployed men, perhaps, or it could be way less than that. It could just be 2 months. So let's take that number and divide back by 6. I'm going to times just by 2. And that's, so times 2 equals 209,914,000. So 209, and then divide that by the 100 billion, 300 million. That was last year's cost. It's 0.21%. So from 0.0021 to, or 0.21% to young unemployed men eligible and for SNAP and able-bodied and able or without disability and without disability, excluding, well, it's from, well, yeah, it's only from 20 to 24. So there you go. Not even, well, maybe 0.5% or 0.1% is the cost compared to the total budget for SNAP, which mostly pays for employed people. So that's the fraud, I guess, that you're considering, even though young men do end up being laid off. Because again, we had about 1 million layoffs. This is, when we're looking at this age group, this is 352,000 people. A good portion of this could be included in the layoffs. Same thing with women. So that's the points that I'm making here, is that there is no real argument. And then even if you look at from 24 to 35, so this is the other argument, people that are older but still considered young that are living at home. Against total SNAP recipients, we have 1.6% of able-bodied unemployed young men aged 24 to 35 that may be recipients of SNAP. And this is against the total amount of SNAP recipients. Against the total population, it's 0.19%, not even 1/5% of the population of young men that are included in this. And included in the SNAP. Well, the population, and just, it's bad. It's just, to say that only 1.6% of these people are lazy, or about 1.25 million of them are lazy, age 24 to 35. Which, mind you, we had just had 1 million layoffs, like I just said. So a good portion of this was probably included with that. And then the average unemployment, as we just discussed, It's 24 weeks, median being 9.8. So between 9.8 weeks, about 10 weeks to 25 weeks worth of unemployment. As we discussed earlier, there's way more unemployed people than there are jobs available. So you can see why people end up being stuck in that position where they have to rely on food stamps, because if they're not having any income for months, especially if they went through a situation similar to what I went through when I wasn't even able to receive unemployment for about 3 months almost. It was at least 2 months long. I wasn't receiving anything, even though I was eligible for it. And it was a big fight. I had to contact my state representatives in order to even get anything done about it. So, with that realistic struggle in mind, and even with the cost analysis, when we start looking at, all right, well, what if these people were not working for an entire year? But then when we look at the numbers compared to last year's budget, it just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't. And then we consider families with 2 dependents. I mean, it doesn't really add up. So people are not taking advantage of the system as much as everyone wants to try to say, because we found where the young men are in this whole metric of SNAP recipients. We found the percentage. All right? Not even 1% of SNAP recipients are unemployed young men, age 20 to 24. And then 24 to 35, it's still like 1.6 compared to SNAP recipients 1.4. And that's the argument that's being levied against, well, why they don't want to hand out emergency benefits, when it literally, this minuscule amount of people is the reason that they're trying to punish 98.5%, well, 97% of those that receive SNAP. Literally 97% of those that receive SNAP, because I want to say this is the actual metric, and I mean, even if you add in the 0.6, well, that's of the population. Sorry, let me, from 0 to 24, sorry. The other 0.8%, when you add that together, that's still not even 2% when you're just looking at men compared to SNAP recipients. Like maybe almost 3%. So again, you're still levying from ages 20 to 35, saying that these are lazy young men, 2% of SNAP recipients. It's because of them that we don't want to pay out emergency funds, or that we want to withhold having any sort of discussions, or that we just literally want to cause mayhem, when the first administration, they held the government open until March. Well, they held the government open until December, and then was able to pay out SNAP benefits until March, from October. No problemo. And you can kind of see exactly why they did that in the first place. It's so that they can win the second time and do exactly what they're doing now. And that's the only explanation for it. When you look at these numbers, their arguments just simply fall apart. It's not true that most SNAP recipients are unemployed. It is not true that it's mostly young men. It is not true that lazy people are taking up most of the budget. It is just simply not true. It's people that are families, people that are struggling to find jobs, people that are fighting, literally struggling to find a job within 5.308 million, if they're even qualified for one. And 2, that's if the job's even real, because we don't know if the numbers since August 2025, if they even considered ghost jobs. So this number could be less. There could be twice as many unemployed people as there are jobs available. You know how much of a struggle that is? For not even just the people that are unemployed, but for the employers too, because they have to deal with really twice the amount of applications that they would otherwise have to deal with. If that's the case. I mean, there's no winning, man. There's no winning. But this is what Democrats should be doing, is actually pulling out numbers, pulling out facts, and not screwing around. So we'll do a fly down of everything that we got here, and then that's it. So the numbers, boom, Try to do by section. All right, so we even sorted by gender. That's how we got the percentages for gender. Then unemployed versus SNAP, adjusting for eligibility. Then finding where the lazy young adults might be. Also considering layoffs 2025 amassed to 1 million alone. So 1 million of the unemployed simply because of this year. And that's another big consideration to be had. Then we look at eligibility without disability, taking out the elderly, which, I mean, that age range is getting pushed another 10 years, so there's going to be a slight influx in both of these numbers come when the one big beautiful bill hits. But not really that beautiful, especially as people are finding more and more issues, and especially when we look at, you know, the expenditure squeeze that's going to be on the budget for SNAP in the next 10 years, trying to take out for inflation, because as we looked over previously, the monthly allotments, the monthly payments have followed inflation to the percentage. 30% food inflation since 2020 or 2019, back when the first shutdown happened, and the budget has followed precisely exactly how it should be in order to keep up with inflation, to continue helping a lot of working people. A lot. About 1 in every, well, no, 9 in every 10. About 9 in every 10 people that receive SNAP benefits are working. And then when you look at the unemployed versus that, all these arguments just fall apart. So, all because of potentially 3% of SNAP recipients is because 1/8 of the population is going to have to go hungry. So I'll leave that here today. As dark as that is, you can find this out for yourself too. I just Google all the right questions and parse through the information, make sure that it's accurate and reflective of the data, especially before, you know, the representation of the data is changing because of this administration, and the accuracy is also, you know, there's threat toward the accuracy. So it's good to at least look at this now before this data just doesn't really work out anymore. But these are the proportions, and we even have some cost considerations. And I mean, these are unrealistic, saying that, I mean, if all are single with only themselves as the dependent for annual, if that was the case, if they were unemployed for the entire year and using SNAP, which isn't true. I mean, at worst, or on average, it's about a half a year, which is still pretty bad. But when we put in those numbers, it should kind of match the expenditure. I mean, not accounting for inflation for this year yet, which is a whole other issue and something that needs to be resolved. Especially with the continuing resolution, there needs to be considerations, because they're trying to cut at least 20 billion a year, or they want to cut, I think it was 187 billion within 10 years. So about 18 billion every year. When last year's was 100 billion, and now they want to take away about 18 billion from that, which is reversing the adjustments for inflation and is just going to end up having to lower your average monthly allotment from 188 back down to probably 130 or 140 a month, which literally 130 to 140 a month for food. People spend that easily within 1 week, and then they have another 3 weeks with no money. This is why 9 out of 10 SNAP recipients work. It's because they're just not getting paid enough against inflation. And now they're getting even more withheld from them. So it's going to be a big squeeze. This is why I call it the big squeeze. It's exactly what it is. So get ready. But this is the warning, at least. And if you like it, leave a like. If you care about it, then hopefully you understand. If not, well, quite frankly, you'll feel the effects soon enough, I'm sure. But to those that don't want to take the time to figure things out for themselves, then, I mean, you're bound by your own ignorance. If you want to believe that it's because of lazy young men that SNAP recipients shouldn't receive welfare, that we shouldn't even have welfare to begin with, when it's literally pennies compared to the, not even pennies, it's chunks of pennies compared to the total population in the United States. Even towards the budget, it's not that much compared to the trillions that have already been spent this year. Even compared to the projects that are going on with the White House. Meaning you got 300 million compared to costs that, I mean, a monthly cost of 104 million, right? You can literally, that ballroom could pay for 3 months worth of benefits for, I mean, portion of the population, portion of the unemployed. It's very interesting to see all that, so, you know, but what do we know, right? Anyways, until next time, this is Spark saying peace, and hopefully you can figure things out, because this is genuinely ridiculous. Bye bye.